The Army wrote that we lost 7 men and 6 horses in the Red Mesa country in the summer of 1925. That is almost true. What the Army did not write, because the Army did not ask, is that our scout counted 17 sets of tracks going into the canyon and only 1 set coming out. Mine. I have lived 43 years with the arithmetic of that difference, and I am writing this now because the doctor says I have maybe 6 months, and because there is a boy, a man now, if you can call him that, who I believe is still walking the mesa on nights when the moon is full, and someone ought to know his face before I take it with me. My name is Elias Rourke. In June of 1925, I was a corporal, 24 years old, 3 years out of the Great War, and still surprised most mornings to be alive. I was assigned to B Troop, 12th Cavalry, out of Fort Wingate, New Mexico. What follows is what I remember. Where I am guessing, I will say so. Where I am certain, I will say that too. There is not much in between. Fort Wingate in June was hot in a way that felt personal. The parade ground threw the heat back at you like it resented being walked on, and the barracks smelled of horse and coal oil and the tobacco of men who had not been paid in 9 days. I remember the morning the assignment came down, because Sergeant Halloran was reading a letter from his wife, and he folded it 3 times before he put it in his shirt pocket, which was a thing he only did when he did not want to lose it. Lieutenant Marcus Ballard called 7 of us into the orderly room at 1000 hours. Ballard was 31, West Point class of 17, and he wore his uniform the way some men wear a suit to church, like it had been made for a better man, and he intended to grow into it. He had the telegram flat on the desk. He read it aloud without looking up. The Indian Agency at Gallup had received reports that a small band of Diné shepherds working the country north of the Chusca foothills had lost stock 22 head of sheep over 3 nights, and that a hogan belonging to a family named Bigay had been burned. There had been no reprisals filed, no complaints of white raiders, no evidence of coyote or wolf predation. The agency was requesting a patrol. Ballard was to take 6 troopers and a scout, ride to the site, take statements, examine the ground, and return within 10 days. It was a nothing assignment. That is worth saying plainly. The kind of ride officers gave to men they wanted to keep busy through the hot months. Halloran actually laughed when Ballard read it, and Ballard smiled, and none of us thought anything of it, except that we would be out of Wingate for a while, and the water in the Mesa country was said to be better than the water at the fort. The 7 of us, Lieutenant Ballard, Sergeant Daniel Halloran, 34, married from Boston originally, the kind of man who could fix a saddle in the dark, Corporal Elias Rourke myself, Trooper Peter Reyes, 20 from Socorro, the only Spanish speaker among us, Trooper Elias Cobb, 26 from Ohio, quiet, Trooper Samuel Whitfield, 22, red-haired, a farrier's son, Trooper Thomas McKinley, 30, whose real name I would only learn was Thomas McKinney after the inquiry, but who signed everything McKinley and answered to it. 7 of us, 6 horses assigned, plus 1 pack mule and 1 remount, and a scout. The scout was Hosteen Ness. I want to be careful about him because he is the only man in this account who understood what was happening from the first day, and because I owe him a debt, I will die owing. He was maybe 50 then, though the sun makes Dean men hard to age. He had scouted for the 12th since 1914. He spoke English cleanly when he chose to, and pretended not to when he did not. He signed the assignment book with a mark rather than a name, and I remember Ballard being irritated by it, and I remember Halloran telling Ballard to let it be. What I did not tell Ballard, and what I have thought about every day since, is that when Hosteen Nez looked at our patrol lined up in the yard the next morning, he counted us. He counted us twice. Then he looked at the horses and counted them, and then he looked back at us and counted us a third time, and his mouth moved once, as if he were doing arithmetic he did not like the answer to. He caught me watching him. He held my eye for a moment. Then he mounted his own pony and rode to the head of the column without a word. We left Fort Wingate on the morning of June 19th, 1925. The sky was the pale, scoured blue it gets in that country before the monsoon breaks. The moon that night would be a waxing crescent. There were 15 nights until it came full. The country north of the Chuskas is not empty. That is the first thing a man learns riding it. It looks empty from a train window and from a map, but on horseback, you understand that it is inhabited by wind that moves through the junipers like a person walking, by ravens that fly in pairs and never in flocks, by the shadow of a mesa that lies on the ground half a mile ahead of you and does not shorten as you approach. We made about 22 miles the first day and camped at a wash, Hosteen Nez, called by a name I could not repeat then and cannot repeat now. Halloran set 2 pickets. Reyes and Cobb took the first watch. I took the second with Whitfield. Nothing happened. I want to be clear about that. The first night, nothing happened. And I mention it only because the absence of anything is where this story begins. At the fire that first night, Nez told a story. He did not tell it to us. He told it to the fire, in Diné, low, in the cadence of a man reciting something he had said many times before, to no audience but himself. Reyes, who had some Diné from his mother's side, listened for a while and then got up and walked to the picket line and did not come back until his watch. I asked him later what the story was about. He said, about a man who wanted to be more than a man and became less. He would not say more. He drank his coffee without looking at me. The second day, we rode into what the maps called Red Mesa country. The name is descriptive. The sandstone in that region runs the color of dried blood under the sun and the color of a bruise under the moon. The mesa walls rise straight up out of sage flats, in shapes that look, from a distance, like broken teeth. The Big Hogan was another day's ride north of it. Ballard's plan was to camp at the foot of the mesa on the second night and reach the burn site by noon of the third day. We reached the mesa in the late afternoon. Nez rode ahead about a quarter mile and stopped his pony at the base of a switchback and did not dismount. I rode up to him. He was looking at the ground. There were hoof prints in the dust beside the trail. They ran parallel to the trail for maybe 40 yards and then stopped. Not turned off. Stopped. Mid-stride. The last print was a full stride, weight forward, the hoof driven deep as if the horse had been running, and then nothing. No mark of a horse being lifted. No mark of a horse turning. Just dust, undisturbed, in every direction. I said, a horse can't stop like that. Nez said, no. I said, so what made them? He did not answer me for a long time. Then he said, without looking up, the tracks are not from a horse. I looked again. They were hoof prints. Cloven at the front, split like a deer's but larger, closer in size to an elk's, except that no elk in that country walks in a 4-beat gait, and no horse leaves a cloven print, and the depth of them said whatever made them weighed as much as a saddled mount. Nez took a small piece of juniper bark from his saddlebag and dropped it on the last print. He watched it land. Then he turned his pony and rode back toward the column and did not speak again for the rest of the afternoon. That night, we camped where Ballard had planned, at the foot of the mesa, in a shallow bowl of sand ringed by boulders. The fire was small. Halloran doubled the pickets without being asked. Around midnight, a coyote came to the edge of the firelight and sat down. I want to describe this carefully. It sat down. Coyotes do not sit at the edge of a cavalry fire. They circle. They yip. They move on. This one sat. It sat for perhaps 6 minutes. It did not blink in that time. I counted. Whitfield, beside me, raised his carbine, and I put my hand on the barrel and pushed it down, and I do not know why I did that. The coyote watched us for another minute, and then stood up and walked, not trotted, walked on all fours back into the dark, in the direction of the mesa. Hosteen Nez had been asleep on the far side of the fire. I looked at him when the coyote left. His eyes were open. They had been open, I think, the whole time. In the morning I found a mark scratched into the leather of his saddle, a single vertical line drawn with a knife point. When I asked him what it was, he said, "A count." I asked, "A count of what?" He said, "Of nights." We rode north on the morning of June 22nd, the 4th day out, and by noon we found the Bige Hogan. I had expected a crime scene. That is what patrols like ours were for statements, sketches, a report filed and forgotten. What we found was not a crime scene. It was a cleaning. The hogan had been burned from the inside, not the outside. The roof had fallen inward in a single collapse. The doorway, which by Diné custom faces east, had been sealed before the fire with a flat stone that had cracked in the heat but had not been moved. There were no bodies. There were no bones. There was no smell of anything but juniper smoke and old ash, though the fire, by the state of the timbers, could not have been more than 8 or 9 days cold. Ballard walked the perimeter and made notes. Halloran and Reyes searched the ground for tracks. Whitfield and Cobb watered the horses at a seep about 60 yards north of the site. McKinley. I remember this. McKinley stood next to me and did not move for almost a full minute, and when I asked him what was wrong, he said, "There should be dogs." He was right. There should have been dogs. Every dine camp in that country had at least 2, and if the family had left in haste, the dogs would still be near the site, thin and territorial. There were no dogs. There were no dog tracks. There were no bird tracks either, and that is the part I did not understand until much later. Hosteen Nez did not come near the hogan. He stopped his pony 50 yards out and dismounted, and sat cross-legged on the ground facing east, and he did not move for the whole 2 hours we spent there. When we mounted up to leave, he mounted with us, and he did not look at the hogan as we passed it. We made another 8 miles that afternoon, and camped in a dry wash Nez recommended, deep cut, with sandstone walls on 3 sides. Ballard was pleased with the position. Defensible, he said, only one approach. Halloran set the pickets. I took the middle watch, midnight to 2. I found the horse at first light. It was Whitfield's mount, a dark bay gelding named Trooper, an unimaginative name. Whitfield had chosen it, and it had been picketed on the outside of the line, closest to the mouth of the wash. It was dead. It had been dead for at least 3 hours, because the flies had already found it, though the sun was not yet up. The killing wound was in the neck. I want to be specific, because the specifics matter. The wound was a single bite. The upper jaw impression was above the mane, behind the ears, and the lower jaw impression was in the soft tissue under the throat. The bite radius, the distance between the canine punctures, was 7.5 inches. I measured it. Halloran measured it after me and got 7 3/4. There is no animal in North America with a bite of that width. A grizzly, at the extreme, might approach 6. But the bite was not the strange part. The strange part was that, in the dust beside the horse, on the side away from the picket line, there were 2 sets of impressions. One was a paw canid, but the size of a dinner plate, with claws that had dug in when the animal had set its weight to pull. The other was a bare human foot, a left foot. The toes were splayed, the arch high, and the print was deep at the ball and light at the heel, the way a man's print looks when he is bending forward to push against something. The paw and the foot were less than a yard apart. They pointed in the same direction at the horse's neck. Halloran called Ballard over. Ballard looked at the two prints for a long time. Then he said, "One of these is somebody's idea of a joke." I remember the way Nez looked at Ballard when he said that. It was the look a father gives a son who has said something stupid at a table where guests are watching. Not angry, not disappointed, just waiting. Ballard ordered the horse buried. It took 4 of us most of the morning. We rode out with Whitfield on the remount, and Whitfield was quiet for the rest of the day. That night, when we camped, Hosteen Nez took his knife and scratched a second vertical line into his saddle. 2 nights, 2 marks, and I understood, in a way I could not have put into words yet, that he was not counting the nights we had been out. He was counting the nights that were left. Ballard decided on the morning of June 23rd to backtrack the killer. It was the right decision by cavalry doctrine. You do not let a predator that has taken one animal follow you until it takes another. You go find it. You cut its trail. You run it down. You kill it. And you continue your mission. Halloran agreed. I agreed. Reyes and Cobb agreed. Whitfield wanted to agree so badly that his agreement did not count for anything. Hosteen Nez did not agree. He said in careful English, "We should ride south. We should ride south today. We should not stop until the moon." Ballard said, "The moon is 8 nights out, Hosteen. We're not turning a patrol on a coyote." Nez said, "It is not a coyote." Ballard said, "What is it then?" Nez looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "It is a thing that used to be a person, and it does not want you to see it in the shape it has to be in when the moon is full." Ballard did not answer him. Ballard was a good officer and a decent man, and I do not want to make him small in this account. He heard what Nez said. He heard it the way an officer hears a warning from a scout as information to be weighed against the mission. He weighed it. He decided to backtrack. We cut the trail an hour east of camp. The prints, the paw, and the foot ran together for maybe 200 yards, and then something happened that I have never seen before or since, and that I have tried in the 4 decades since to explain to myself. The paw print, in one stride, became a cloven hoof. I do not mean that the paw print stopped and a hoof print began. I mean that in the same impression, in wet sand near a seep, the front of the print was a paw with 4 claws set forward, and the back of the print was the cleft of a hoof, and the transition between them was smooth, as if whatever had made the print had been changing while it set its weight down. Halloran said, "That's not possible." Nez said, "No." We followed the tracks another 1/4 mile. They changed twice more, paw to hoof, hoof to bare foot to paw again. The stride length changed with the shape longer for the hoof, shorter for the foot, but the pace did not. Whatever it was, it moved at the same speed, no matter what it was moving as. At the end of the trail, in a bowl of red sand at the base of a low bluff, the tracks stopped. Not gradually. They stopped the way the hoof prints beside the switchback had stopped on the first day. Last stride full weight, next stride nothing. And in the center of the bowl, arranged carefully, we found the following. 1 coyote skull, jaw wired shut with copper wire. 1 raven feather, tied to the skull with a strip of tanned hide. 1 flat stone, on which had been drawn, in what I believed then and believe now was blood, a single vertical line. Ballard picked up the skull. Nez said quickly and sharply, "Do not." Ballard put the skull down. We rode back to the wash in silence. Halloran doubled the pickets that night. Whitfield could not eat. Reyes prayed under his breath for most of an hour, and I did not ask what he was praying against. Nez scratched a 3rd line into his saddle before we bedded down, and this time, when I looked at the leather, I saw that the 3 lines had been drawn to form something. Not a tally. A doorway. 3 vertical lines, close together. A left post, a right post, and a lintel across the top, drawn faintly with the flat of the knife. I said, "Hosteen, what are you drawing?" He said, "A door." I said, "For what?" He said, "For it to walk through when the moon is full. It uses one every time. Sometimes an old hogan, sometimes a burned one, sometimes a saddle, sometimes a man." I did not sleep that night. I lay on my back and watched the stars, and I thought about the coyote that had sat at our fire on the second night, and I thought about the bite on Whitfield's horse, and I thought about the paw that became a hoof in a single stride. And somewhere before dawn I understood, with the kind of certainty that arrives without evidence and does not require any, that whatever had killed the horse was not following us. It was walking with us. It had been walking with us for days. I was correct. I was also, as it turned out, wrong about the number. The 4th morning, June 24th, Hosteen Nez was up before the fire was rebuilt. I woke to find him walking the perimeter of the camp with a length of juniper stick, and he was counting. He walked the picket line first and touched each set of hoofprints with the stick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 horses. He nodded. He walked the sleeping area next and touched each bedroll, 1 through the 7. 7 men. He nodded. Then he walked the outside of the camp in a wide, slow circle at the edge of the picket line, and he counted the prints that had come through the perimeter in the night. He counted them once. Then he sat down on a rock and closed his eyes for maybe half a minute. Then he stood up and counted them again. I was watching him by then. So was Halloran. So, from the other side of the fire was Ballard. Nez walked over to us. He was carrying the stick loose at his side. He looked at Ballard first, and then at Halloran, and then at me, and he said, in the careful English he used when he wanted no one to misunderstand him, 17 came into this camp last night. 6 horses. 7 of you. That is 13. There are 4 more sets of tracks in the dust between the pickets and the fire that do not belong to any of us. They walked in. They walked out. They walked between the bedrolls. One of them stopped beside the corporal for a long time. He looked at me when he said that. Ballard said, "That's impossible. The pickets would have called out." Nez said, "The pickets did not see them." Halloran said, "Show me." Nez showed him. The 4 extra sets of tracks were exactly where Nez had said they were. 2 of them were bare human feet. 1 was a paw, the same paw from the horse killing. 1 was a hoof. All 4 had walked in through the mouth of the wash, between the pickets, past the fire, and out again the way they had come. Not one of them had disturbed a bedroll. Not one of them had spooked a horse. The tracks that had stopped beside me had stopped for a long time, as Nez had said. The impression at the ball of the foot was deep. Whatever had stood there had stood at my head for perhaps a minute, perhaps 2, and then had walked on. I remember what I felt at that moment, and I want to record it honestly. I did not feel fear. Not yet. What I felt was a kind of cold, orderly recognition, the same feeling I had had in France in 1918, when I understood, watching a shell land 40 yards short of my position, that I was going to live through the war. It was the feeling of arithmetic completing itself. The coyote at the fire, the bite on the horse, the changing tracks, the doorway on Nez's saddle. Now this. I said, "Hosteen, what is walking with us?" He said, "One thing." I said, "The tracks are different shapes." He said, "Yes. One thing. Many shapes. It cannot decide which one to keep, so it wears them all." Ballard, standing behind me, said quietly, and this is important, Because Ballard was a rationalist to the last hour of his life, Ballard said, "Hosteen, what do we do?" Nez said, "We ride south. Today. Now. We do not stop. We reach the fort before the moon." Ballard said, "How many days is that?" Nez said, 4. Ballard said, "How many nights until the moon?" Nez said, 4. There was a silence at the fire that I have never forgotten. Ballard was a good officer. He calculated the distance. He calculated the ride. He calculated the doctrine and the map and the hours of daylight in June at that latitude. He calculated everything a West Point man is trained to calculate. Then he said, "Break camp. We ride south. Full column, double time on the flats. Hosteen has the point." We broke camp in 20 minutes. We were mounted and moving by 7. By noon, we had made 12 miles. By dark, we had made 26. Nez did not sing at the head of the column that day, and he did not tell a story that night at the fire. But when I looked at his saddle before I slept, there were 4 lines scratched in the leather now. Not 3, 4. And around the 4 lines, faintly, drawn with the flat of the knife, was the outline of a doorway with someone standing in it. We saw the second one on the 5th morning. I want to be careful here, because this is where my testimony diverges most sharply from the official report, and I want the reader to understand exactly what I saw and exactly what I did not see. I saw it. Reyes saw it. Hosteen Nez saw it. Ballard did not see it, and I do not know whether that is because he was riding at the front of the column with his eyes on the trail, or because it did not choose to be seen by him. We were making a dry crossing about 2 hours after dawn. A flat stretch of hardpan, maybe half a mile wide, with a low ridge of red rock running along the eastern edge. The sun was up, but the ridge was still in shadow. Reyes was riding drag. He called forward quietly, not a shout, and I dropped back to him. He pointed at the ridge. There was a figure standing on it. It was small. That was the first thing I noticed. Small enough that at half a mile I first took it for a coyote sitting upright or a stump. But it was not a coyote. It was standing on 2 legs. It was, as best I could judge from the distance, about 4 feet tall. It was not moving. It was watching us. I raised my field glasses. Through the glasses, I could see it more clearly than I would have wished. It was the shape of a child. A boy, I thought, though I could not have said why. It was naked, or nearly so. I could see the color of skin, brown and dust-covered, but no clothing. Its arms hung at its sides. Its head was turned toward the column. It was too far away for me to see the face. Reyes said in Spanish, "That is not a person." I said, "It looks like a person." He said, "That is not a person. Look at the shadow." I looked at the shadow. The figure was standing in the shadow of the ridge, and its own shadow cast by the low sun coming over the mesa behind us was thrown forward across the sand of the hardpan. The shadow was longer than the figure was tall, which was correct for the angle of the sun. The shadow had 4 legs. I lowered the glasses. I raised them again. The figure was still upright, still on 2 legs, arms at its sides, head turned toward us. The shadow, cast on the sand in front of it, was on 4 legs, with a long muzzle and a raised tail. I said, "Hosteen." Nez had already dropped back. He looked at the ridge without the glasses. He looked at the shadow. He said in English, "That is the small one. That is the one who is learning." I said, "Learning what?" He said, "Learning us." I said, "There are 2 of them." He said, "There have always been 2 of them. The big one has been walking with us. The small one has been watching. The big one is teaching." Reyes crossed himself. I did not. Though I had been raised Catholic, and had not lost the reflex until then. I lowered the glasses, and I looked at the figure on the ridge with my naked eye, and I understood with the same cold arithmetic I had understood at the fire the morning before, that the small one had been on every ridge we had passed for 4 days, that the tracks we had followed on the 3rd day, the ones that changed shape mid-stride, had been the big one's demonstration, that the doorway Nez had scratched on his saddle was not a warning. It was a countdown. 3 nights until the moon. We rode on. We did not stop to look at the ridge again. When I glanced back, half a mile later, the figure was gone. That night, we camped in the open, on a flat, with no defensible ground for a mile in any direction. Ballard did it deliberately. He wanted 360-degree fields of fire. He wanted the pickets to see anything that came near. Halloran laid a wide picket line and set 2 men on watch instead of 1 in pairs, so that no man was ever alone at his post. At around 1 in the morning, Whitfield, who was on the west picket with Cobb, fired his carbine. He fired 3 rounds. He was screaming when he did it. When we got to him, he was on his knees in the dust, and he could not tell us what he had shot at. He said only that something had walked past the fire in the middle of the camp, between the bedrolls, and had gone out through the west picket, and that when it had gone past him, close enough to touch, it had looked at him with his own face. Cobb had not seen it. Nez walked the ground where Whitfield had fired. There were no tracks, not the small figures, not the big ones, no paw, no hoof, no foot. The dust was smooth. Whitfield did not sleep for the rest of the night. He sat by the fire with his carbine in his lap, and he watched the darkness in every direction, and he said, at one point, to no one in particular, it knew my name. When it walked past me, it said my name. Nez did not scratch a line in his saddle that night. He scratched a name. He would not tell me whose. We reached Red Mesa on the night of July 4th, 1925, and I am aware of the irony of the date. It has occurred to me, in the 43 years since, that whatever was walking with us may have chosen that night for reasons I cannot know, or may have chosen it for no reason at all, and I do not know which possibility is worse. The moon rose at 7:40 in the evening. It was full. It was the largest moon I have ever seen in that country, before or since, and it came up the color of bone over the eastern rim of the mesa, and it did not seem to move once it was risen. It hung. We had not made the ride Nez had asked for. We had tried. Whitfield had slowed us on the 5th day. He could not sit his horse without shaking. And on the 6th day, the pack mule had gone lame, and Ballard had ordered a 2-hour halt to redistribute the load, and by the time we understood that the 2 hours had cost us the ride, the moon was already up and we were still in the mesa country, and Nez was standing at the head of the column with his rifle across his saddle and his eyes closed. We made camp at the base of the mesa because there was no time to reach anywhere else. The mesa wall rose 200 feet at our backs, red and vertical, and the flats stretched south in front of us, open, defensible in theory, indefensible in fact. Ballard set every man on watch. No one slept. Nez did not build a fire. At around 10 o'clock, the coyotes stopped. They had been calling to each other all evening, the way they do on a bright night, and at 10, they stopped. All of them, at once. Across a distance I would later estimate it close to a mile in every direction. The silence was complete. It was the silence of a room that has been listening to you and has just decided to speak. Halloran said, quietly, "Sir." Ballard said, "I hear it." What we heard next was not a sound. It was the shape of a sound. A compression of air, high on the mesa wall behind us, as if something very large had moved and displaced the night. I turned in my saddle. So did Halloran. So did Reyes. The thing came over the mesa wall without noise. I want to describe it because I owe it that much, and because the illustration on the front of this document, the one my niece has drawn from my description for the folklorist who will publish this, that illustration is close, but it is not exact, and no illustration could be. It was tall. I would say 12 feet, though I did not measure and could not have. It was thin in a way that suggested starvation, but moved in a way that suggested strength. Its ribs and vertebrae were visible under a hide that seemed to be coming off in strips, as if the shape it wore was too small for what was inside it. Its skull was long and low, and canid but wrong, the jaw too heavy, the teeth exposed in a fixed grin because the lips had rotted or been removed. Its eye, I saw only one clearly, was red, and it did not reflect the moon. It made the light around it. It came down the mesa wall in a single motion. Not a jump, not a climb, a fall, controlled, four-legged, the claws of its forelimbs finding purchase in stone that would not have held a man's boot. It landed on the flats at the edge of our camp without disturbing the dust. Halloran raised his carbine. Ballard shouted an order I did not hear. The thing came upright on its hind legs in the space between two heartbeats. I remember this precisely because my own heart had stopped between them, and it crossed the 20 yards to Halloran in a motion I cannot describe because I did not see the motion, only the beginning of it and the end. The end of it was this. Halloran was 6 feet off his saddle, lifted straight up into the moonlight by the creature's left forelimb, which had closed around his chest below the arms. His hat had come off. It was spinning in the air about 4 feet above his head, turning once, and the moon was behind it. His carbine was falling. It had discharged as it left his hand, and the round had struck the sandstone 20 feet above me, and I remember the sound of the ricochet more clearly than I remember any other sound of my life. Halloran was screaming, but he was not screaming in fear. I have thought about this for 43 years, and I am as certain of it now as I was then. The sound coming out of him was recognition. He had seen the thing's face at close range in the second before it lifted him, and the sound he made was the sound a man makes when he sees, at the last moment, someone he had thought was dead. Reyes fired. Cobb fired. Whitfield fired. Ballard fired his sidearm 3 times. I did not fire. My horse had thrown me at the sound of the ricochet, and I was on the ground behind a low ledge of sandstone. And by the time I found my knees, the shooting had stopped, because there was nothing left to shoot at. The creature was gone. Halloran was gone. His hat was on the sand 10 feet from my hand, still turning slowly on its brim in the dust. I heard Ballard shouting orders. I heard Whitfield making a sound that was not a word. I heard Reyes praying in Spanish. And then I heard, from above and behind me, high on the mesa wall, in the direction the big one had come from, a second sound. It was small. It was not loud. It was the sound of a foot, a bare foot, a child's foot settling into loose sand. I turned my head. The small one was standing 6 feet from me, on a ledge of sandstone at my eye level, and it was looking at me. I want to describe him because he is the reason I am writing this letter, and because he is the part of the account the Army refused to record, even when I put it in my statement in September of 1925, and the part the folklorist tells me will be the hardest for readers to believe, and the part I need most for someone to know. He was a boy. I will say that first, because it is the most important true thing about what I saw. He was, I would guess, 9 years old. He was thin the way children in that country were thin in that decade, ribs visible under brown skin, elbows and knees prominent. His hair was black and long and unbraided. He was naked to the waist, and wore a strip of deer hide around his hips. His feet were bare and dusty. His hands hung at his sides. He was not armed. He was not crouched. He was standing at his full small height and looking at me from a distance of about 6 feet. His eyes were human. I want to be absolutely clear about that. They were dark brown, set in a young face, and they held the intelligence of a child who has been made, too early, to understand adult things. There was no red in them. There was no glow. There was no wrongness in his eyes at all. That, I have come to believe, is what has made it impossible for me to sleep on nights of the full moon in every one of the 43 years since. I was on my knees. I had my sidearm in my right hand. I had drawn it without remembering drawing it. I raised it. I raised it slowly because my hand was shaking, and I put the front sight on the boy's chest, and my finger was on the trigger. The boy did not move. He watched me raise the weapon. He watched the sight settle on his sternum. He did not flinch. Behind me, Ballard was shouting my name. Reyes was shouting for the horses. Whitfield was making the sound that was not a word. I heard all of it. But between me and the boy on the ledge there was a silence that the shouting could not enter. A silence like the one that had come over the coyotes an hour before. And in that silence, the boy looked at me, and I looked at the boy, and I understood 2 things at once. The first thing was that the big one, the teacher, the thing that had taken Halloran, was somewhere very close, watching this. It had lifted the sergeant, and it had gone, and it had left the boy here on the ledge for a reason, and the reason was that this was a lesson. Halloran had been the lesson given by the teacher. What I did next would be the lesson given by me. The boy was here to learn how a white cavalry corporal handled a dying child at the point of a pistol on the night of a full moon at the base of Red Mesa. The second thing was harder, and I have spent 43 years being sure of it, and I am sure of it still. The boy did not want to be there. I do not know how I knew this. I was not a man given to intuitions. But there was something in the way he stood, the way his hands hung open at his sides rather than curled, the way his shoulders held a small, unnatural stillness, the way his eyes did not leave mine, that told me he had not chosen this. He had been brought. He was being taught. And what he was being taught, on that ledge, in that moonlight, was that he was next. I lowered the pistol. I did it slowly, so that whatever was watching from the dark would see that it was a decision and not an accident. I lowered it to my side. I opened my hand and let it fall in the sand. I raised my empty hands in front of me, palms out, the way a man raises them to show a child that he is not a danger. The boy looked at my hands. He looked at my face. His expression did not change. But something in his eyes, I will not swear to this, because I was exhausted and terrified, and it was possible I imagined it. But I will say, what I believe I saw something in his eyes softened. Not in gratitude, not in relief, in recognition. The same look Halloran had made the sound of 30 seconds before, when the big one lifted him. Then the boy turned his head, slowly, to his left. He was looking at something on the mesa above him that I could not see. He held that look for, perhaps, 4 seconds. Then he turned back to me, and he raised his right hand, palm out, and held it up in the air between us. Not a wave, not a signal, a mark, a print made in air. Then he stepped backward off the ledge into the dark, and he was gone. I heard nothing after that. No landing, no footstep, nothing. I sat in the sand for a time I cannot measure. When Reyes found me, I was still on my knees with my hands raised, and my pistol was in the sand at my side, and I was shaking so hard, he thought at first I had been wounded. We rode south at dawn. We did not go back for Halloran because there was nothing to go back for. We reached Fort Wingate on the morning of July 8th. 5 men, 6 horses, 1 scout. Whitfield never spoke again after Red Mesa. He was discharged medically in October, and I do not know what became of him. Cobb transferred to the 7th and was killed in a training accident in 1927. Reyes returned to Socorro and lived to be 70, and I received a Christmas card from him every year until 1968, when the card did not come. Ballard wrote the report. The report said 7 men had entered the country, and 1 had been lost to what was believed to be an animal attack, and the remainder had returned intact. The report did not mention the tracks, or the coyote, or the doorway on Nez's saddle, or the boy on the ledge. Hosteen Nez was paid his scout's wages at Wingate on July 9th, and he signed for them with his mark, and he rode out of the fort that afternoon, and I never saw him again. He would be nearly 100 years old now if he were living, and I do not believe he is living. But I have thought, in every year since, about the mark he scratched on his saddle on the 6th night, the name he would not tell me. I have come, in the last months, to a suspicion about whose name it was. I will not write it down. If I am right, writing it would be a kind of summoning, and I have summoned enough for 1 life. I am writing this in October of 1968, in a rented room in Gallup, New Mexico, which is as close as I have been able to make myself come to the Red Mesa country in 43 years. My doctor is in Albuquerque. My daughter is in Denver. My wife is buried in a cemetery in Ohio that I have visited twice. I came to Gallup because the folklorist who will receive this letter lives here, and because I wanted to be within a day's ride of the mesa when I finished the account, and because there is a thing I need to say at the end that I could not say from any other place. The boy on the ledge would be 52 years old this year. I have thought about that number for a long time. 52. He would be a grown man now. He would have learned what he was being taught on the night of July 4th, 1925, and he would have practiced it, and he would have become, by now, whatever the big one had been. The witchery way, Hosteen Nez told me once, is passed from teacher to student, and the student, when the teacher is finished, becomes the teacher. That was what I was watching, on the ledge. Not a hunt, a graduation. Halloran had been the boy's first lesson, given by the master. Mine had been the boy's second, given by himself. The mercy he showed me, because it was mercy, I have no doubt of that anymore, was the first mercy he had ever given, and he gave it because I had given mine first, and because that is how the practice is passed. I have wondered sometimes whether the mercy took, whether, having chosen once not to kill, he chose again and again, and became something other than what the big one had wanted him to become. I would like to believe that. I have no evidence for it. I have other evidence of a different kind. In August of 1953, an oil survey party of 4 men out of Farmington disappeared in the country north of Red Mesa. The bodies were recovered 11 days later. The report I obtained through a friend at the Bureau describes their injuries in language I will not repeat here. It also describes, in a paragraph, the friend was uncertain about, including a 5th set of tracks around the campsite, bare human feet, adult size, high-arched, deep at the ball that did not match any of the 4 men, and that appeared to have entered the camp through the picket line without disturbing it. In September of 1961, a Navajo tribal police officer named Yazzie was reported missing near a Wash the Dine Kowal by a name I still cannot repeat. His vehicle was found. He was not. A note in his patrol log, written the day before he disappeared, read, "The man on the ridge is back. He is older now." He waved. I mention these because I want the folklorist, and whoever reads this after him, to understand that the account I have given is not finished. It was not finished when we rode out of Red Mesa in July of 1925. It has continued in the country north of the Chuscas, in ways I have been able to trace and in ways I have not, for every one of the 43 years since. The moon, as I write this, is 2 nights from full. I am told the weather in the Mesa country tonight is clear. I did not fire on the night of July 4th, 1925, and I am glad I did not, because I do not believe the round would have killed the boy, and I do believe it would have taught him something I could not have taken back. But I am no longer certain that the mercy I gave him has been a mercy to anyone else. I have wondered in these last months whether the men who disappeared in 1953 and 1961, and in the years I do not yet know about whether those men are the price of the boy I did not shoot. I do not know the answer. I will not know it. My part of the account ends here. But if you are reading this, and you are in the Red Mesa country, on a night when the moon is full, and you see a figure standing on a ridge at the edge of your firelight, a figure that is small if the light is poor, and larger if the light is good, and that does not cast the shadow, it should. I would ask you to do what I did. Lower your weapon. Raise your hands. Let him see that you are not a danger. He remembers faces. I believe that. He remembered mine in 1925, and I believe he remembers it still. And I believe that on some night in the last 43 years, when I was sleeping in Ohio and thinking myself safe, he stood at the foot of my bed and looked at me the way he looked at me on the ledge, and decided again. He has decided in my favor every time. I do not know why. The moon is rising. Elias Rourke. Gallup, New Mexico, October 1968.